Welcome, everyone, to the next perfect step, where all possibilities lie in conversation. I'm your co-host, Laurie Mullen.
And I'm your co-host, Lori Tremblay. We are welcome back, Henry Cameron Allen, which is a returning guest. We're so excited to have him back. And he just wrote a new book, The Lost Traveler's Field Guide. And I'm just going to read a little bit, and then you can tell us mostly all about it. It offers a groundbreaking odyssey through the uncharted dimensions of grief by weaving together science, spirituality, and the vast potential of the human mind and heart. This unique exploration reframes and reimagines the grief journey from a finite experience to a transformative evolution, helping grief walkers find peace and purpose again. So we've read your book. It's wonderful. And
Thank
just
you.
We'd like to know how you came about writing the book. I know you've had this grief journey, and you're a grief certified grief counselor too.
Yeah. I thank you for reading it. I'm just overjoyed that it's been received by you and so many others with such positivity, and the reviews keep coming and the 5 stars, and I'm just over the moon about it because my son Cameron really inspired this whole journey. He left through brain cancer 16 years ago. Next month it'll be 16 years. And it's really opened me up to different perspectives. I was a single father. He was my only child, and he was 13 when he transitioned. And so I had to really go through a process of reinventing myself and figuring out who I am now, if not a parent, right? My grandmother used to say, "You're an actor if you're acting," because I was a young budding actor at the time, and I was not working. And she said, "Well, you're not an actor unless you're working," right? And so her voice would echo in my head, "You're a parent if you're parenting." And when that is plucked out of the equation, it just sort of sends you on this loop. And in the book, I decided not to use chapters, but dimensions. And the first dimension is dimension 0, the Big Bang. And that's really what it feels like. And I think it's that way with any kind of grief. It begins with a big bang, whatever the event is that triggers one's grief. It's like the universe explodes in your face, and it will never look the same again. You never experience reality the same way. And not long after I had been diagnosed with complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, they call it. I call it post-traumatic spiritual development. That's what the SD stands for me. And one of the symptoms that accompanies that journey, that diagnosis for me, and it's different for everybody, is sleep paralysis. And it's when you are lucid dreaming, you're fully aware and awake in your dream state. You're aware that you're dreaming. You want to break out of it. You want to wake up, but you can't. You can't open your eyes. You can't wiggle a toe. And at first it was frightening because I thought, am I dead? Am I in a coma? Am I having a stroke? I had no idea. That lack of control was frightening. And helplessness is a trigger for me anyway, because when you've been sitting at your child's hospital bed for on and off 2 years, helpless to do anything to save him, it's a very familiar feeling. And I think we've all felt helpless at one time or another. And so in that sleep paralysis state, I was completely helpless when it came to the waking world. In the dream state, I was in control. It was my dream, after all. And the more it happened, I started to realize that, perhaps this was my body's way of protecting me from waking triggers, because the waking triggers are more intense. And They come up on milestone days, birthdays, holidays. We all know what those feel like. And in my dream state, again, I'm fully in control of what's going on. And invariably, what started happening was something would occur in the dream state that would bring wisdom. I think last time I was here, I talked about the peregrine in my sleep paralysis epiphany, I call them, swooping down and saying, it's time for a word, like widow or orphan, for parents who have outlived their children to be able to turn to. And that I brought into the waking world, that wisdom. And I changed my branding for the Lost Travelers Club, which is the foundation that Cameron and I started together when he was still here. And I had another one of these paralysis epiphanies, and it played out like a video series in 13 chapters or 13 episodes. It's very short, and it laid out 13 dimensions of the grief journey. I'm sure there must be more, but what was presented to me in this epiphany was 13 episodes. And so I broke out of my sleep state finally, eventually, and I knew I had to create it. And so one of the things that we hear a lot in peregrine circles is there's no roadmap for parental grief. And I remembered taking road trips with my parents, and they always would stop at the 7-Eleven and get the field guide, right? That showed you all those off the beaten track places that you might have missed otherwise or not on the map, on the regular road map. So that's where field guide came up, because Lost Traveler is another part of this vision. It's part of the branding of the Lost Travelers Club, which was really created to be a travel organization, a club, because they say that parental grief is the club nobody wants to belong to, right? Well, we're here. We might as well have a club and step powerfully back into the world together amongst people who get it. And so the field guide is a companion, and in the picture of that, and the vision itself came to me because it was my experience, specifically a message for peregrines. But I thought, it's broader than that. And I've been working with an intern who's an animator at the Cincinnati Institute for Art and Design. And we're creating the video series. And I thought, this is so important that people hear this now, because people are really feeling lost. And so I thought, well, I'll just write a book. I'll put it into book form. And as I was writing the book, which was also very specifically for peregrines, just this thought kept needling me. This is bigger than just one group of grief walkers. Grief is a universal life skill that we are all going to meet in some measure or another throughout our lives, and most of us are deficient. Why not provide a new framework to think about grief for everybody? And so I rewrote the whole thing with a broader perspective, taking each reader through these 13 dimensions. And then that wasn't enough. I loved what came through, but it wasn't enough because it was too broad in a sense. And so I wrote a workbook as a companion piece to personalize the journey and to sort of internalize and sort of gauge where you are, right? Because grief is nonlinear. And so you may start out with the big bang, I think everybody does, but then you may jump to dimension 4 and then jump to dimension 11 and then back to 2 and, then revisit 4 and 11 and back to 13 and then, all over the place. And so I thought that writing a workbook would be helpful as a journal to document. And it also provides affirmations and exercises, creative exercises that one can do as they're exploring. So that's basically where it came from, and it's out there.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you did a workbook with it. I mean, I
Thank you.
think so many times that I read these books and it resonates with me and I get it. And for like a month, it's front and center. And then it slowly just disappears and I haven't done anything with it. Right. And
Right.
I think that the workbook really helps one personalize it. Like it, the book resonates, but then the workbook personalizes it. I love that you have the affirmations and the reflective questions. I mean, it really makes it personal and it really helps you walk through the process of what you're talking about in the book. I think that was just brilliant. I think it
Thank
was just
you.
brilliant.
Well, I can't claim credit for it. I can only claim that I was the amplifier for this information. We are receivers and we are amplifiers. And I wanted it to feel like a gentle hand holding through a very intense and confusing process, and something that a reader can go back and revisit maybe years later and say, wow, have I grown? And how are these affirmations hitting me now, 16 years later, as in my case, or what new affirmations are coming up in me, each individual person, right? So thank you. That's great feedback, and it just makes me very happy.
And take credit for it. You may just be the amplifier, but you were open to amplify it and you were brave enough to do something with it. So kudos.
Thank you. Well, it had to be done. I mean, it was call it a calling. But it was very, very clear that this was not about me. This was really information, because when you're a grief walker, and it could be from a child, it could be a parent, it could be a friend, it could be a pet. There are so many words, I think, and expressions that keep us in what I call a vortex of mourning. And as you see in the book, mourning carries you through a couple of different dimensions, and it's very different in quality from grieving, isn't it? Mourning is a temporary state. It's a passive state. You can do nothing with it but be in it and reflect. As you start, that numbness and shock start to wear off from the big bang, then you settle into your mourning. And then around dimension 3, you start to recognize that there are other people around you who are mourning as well. And we're all interconnected. That's why I used quantum physics as a metaphor. That's what came through. I mean, I didn't choose to do that. It laid out. It's just, funnily enough, I'm kind of an armchair science nerd. And I love the concepts that have emerged out of quantum physics, because it really shows us that we are all interconnected, and not just people, right? The screen behind you, and my water bottle, and my dog, and my house, and the stars, and everything is interconnected. And it takes observation in order for that phenomenon, that connection, that interaction to happen. It takes observation. So what you said, Laurie, about being open to it, I think we all have that capacity to question and to tap into that childlike sense of wonder that we carry throughout our lives as humans. It's always there, even though it's sometimes pushed down, sublimated. We're told, let go of childish things. There are some things worth hanging on to.
You mentioned a good point too, Henry Cameron, that we're all connected. And then I think I'd like you to speak a little bit more about the concept of the dimensions as far as the metaphysical quantum physics, but also I think you mentioned the point that because we're all connected, that means we're still connected to our loved ones who,
Yeah, I really believe that quantum mechanics, which is really the opposite of classical physics, right? Classical physics are the physical world. When you throw a glass, it'll break, kind of a thing. But on the quantum level, and quantum basically just means unpredictable and not readily visible. It's on the subatomic level that we can't see with our normal senses. We can't see or sense, but we know it's there. And so I do believe that quantum physics, quantum mechanics has proven that death is an illusion. Through quantum physics, and the two are interchangeable, quantum mechanics, quantum physics, mechanics being the interaction, the act of interacting, and physics is the physical state of the subatomic world. We know through scientific proof that everything is energy and frequency, and energy frequency can't be created, it can't be destroyed, it just transmutes, it changes form, right? When it's observed interacting with another particle, it's only through that observation that it can exist. And so for me, what it's given me, the gift it's given me, is the realization, the fact that death is an illusion, right? That we are all energy, we are all frequency. And I even separate those two. I see frequency. There's only one frequency in existence, and that's love. If you're going to put a name on it, a label on it, it's love. That's the only frequency. Even the people we point fingers at and call corrupt and bad people, right? We shake our fingers at them. My grandmother used to say, when you're pointing a finger at somebody, you've got three pointing back at yourself, right? It's part of that interconnectedness, but it's also reflecting on what is it about that person that's triggering me, right? And to realize that every person that we judge as bad or corrupt or awful or evil even was an innocent little baby at one time and is still part of that frequency of love. And they're in fact operating out of a frequency of love, love of power, love of money, love of manipulation, whatever you want to call it. And to me, that's a lower intensity of love. It's like the volume has been turned way down, right? And again, we're all amplifiers as much as we're receivers. And so those of us that are putting that love frequency more intensely out into the world, intentionally out into the world, we recognize it in other people. We recognize when we're matching that frequency, don't we? It's like operating a radio back in the day. You would turn the dial, right? And you might hit a song that, I'm not resonating with that one. So you turn the dial again, sometimes a very subtle movement, and then you want to dance, right? Or it's a talk show that you like what they're talking about. You know when you are matching that frequency of love. But even a frequency requires an energy to move it between people, between particles. And that energy that moves the frequency for me is trust. You cannot move love into the world without trust. Trust in yourself, trust in the greater good, trust that everything is precisely as it's meant to be in the moment that you're in. Otherwise, it would be otherwise. And it's a simplified way, which again, I hope the book simplifies these big thoughts, these big concepts into something digestible that's universally understandable, right? So yeah, I think that, to look at each dimension as fluid, that you're not stuck in one dimension. You could be in multiple dimensions at the same time, right?
Right. Gives you a lot of hope.
It certainly does for me. Yeah. It gave me, and after, and the whole concept came in one episode, right? This wasn't something that was like a series of dreams. This was all included. And I woke up at 3 a.m. and started writing it. And it just flew out of my fingers. And that's when I knew it was an important thing. I recognized that This is something that I need to bring forward here because I think it can help a lot of people. I really do.
I agree. And I think that the way that you wrote it too, even if people don't quite understand quantum or that word scares them, they're not scientifically brained like me. Sometimes when people are like quantum, I'm like, oh, this is going to be too much for me. You have walked it through in steps that is just easy to understand, you can relate to, and it was beautifully done. So don't even be afraid of the word quantum because you explain it effortlessly. It was just fabulously done. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I try to put in the introduction to the book, in the preface, that it just sort of a layperson's way of understanding what exactly quantum is. And that sort of sets a certain understanding as you journey through the book and the workbook. It's great to have that feedback directly because you never know. Unless somebody writes a review, which thank you, Laurie, for writing such a beautiful review. It touched my heart. A writer doesn't really get feedback directly like that, you know, and to have the opportunity and the platform to talk about it in these terms really, really is helpful. And it inspires me to want to do more of this because I got a few books in me, I think. You know, I started talking about words that we use on this grief journey, words like loss. I don't feel like I lost anything. And yet we've been sort of programmed. I'm sorry for your loss. Oh, I lost my child. And I'm like, every time I hear it, I'm like, well, that's a pity. Like, where did you leave? Where did you lose them? Is it like you dropped your keys, you know, or your favorite scarf? I can't find it anywhere. Well, no, we know precisely where our children are and our loved ones in general. They're right here in our hearts. They're very much alive, working in and through us. And if we are open to that idea, it's not about reuniting with them in heaven, right? Which a lot of people really, you know, are faith-based in their, and that brings them so much comfort. And I wanted it to come across, and I hope it did in the book, that this is not, you know, faith and science are not mutually exclusive. You don't have to give up one to appreciate and find the truth in both. Um, how did you experience that? Because you're both pretty spiritual people, I think. And I really was hoping that this would sort of help mitigate that threshold, that line that sometimes people don't want to cross. There's a lot of fear around the unknown. And faith is the unknown. Faith is what you can't use your physical senses to experience, right? It's the belief in something that you can't see, touch, taste, right? And science, on the other hand, is what is tangible. It's what you can witness and observe. And as our technology expands, we're able to observe more than we ever have in human history. And science is not the end. Science is not a Bible that says this is the way. Science is always changing. Science is always expanding. And that to me is thrilling. It's exciting. It'll be interesting to see how the world looks in the next 10, 15, 20 years from this standpoint anyway. How did you experience that in the book? That dance between spirituality and science, faith and science?
For me, I think you really explained it in a very like a gentle way, like you're guiding someone through a path of the dimensions. I love that, and how you said everything is interconnected, and you showed that that was scientific, but also you also put some a feeling of great love, that we're connected in that way as well. That frequency you talked about, that is everything. It's from where everything comes from, that frequency. So I think you made that dance very understandable and very positive. Yeah, it felt like it just made me happy just to read like the different the different dimensions and what could happen and how someone could be connected again. Like the Big Bang, you're isolated, you don't know what's going on. You are blindsided almost. And then you work your way back to finding your balance and then finding your connection with yourself first and then your loved ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I just thought it was beautifully done.
Thank you.
In that way.
What did you think? What did you both of you think of the length of it? I bounced it off a few people and they said it's way too short. Nobody will publish it. You know, I wanted to keep it concise because I know people are busy. I know people are not inclined to read as we used to be. I'm still working on the video series because I know there are people who won't look at a book, that they prefer to see it laid out visually. What did you think of the length? How did you experience that?
So I think that you left us wanting more, right? I don't think that there was a definition of thinking that it was too short or too long. Clearly it wasn't too long, but I mean, I feel that you have so much more to give. I think it was perfect in the fact that it was a short book. And then there was the workbook to really integrate the book, to really work with your own personal. And I think that's what we have to do. Sometimes we do too many steps at once, right? We're trying to get to the very end and get out of it, right? Where, like you said, it is a journey. And I think that it was perfect. It was the perfect length, knowing that you do have many more books ahead of you. And that this was a great start to really get somebody to walk that journey. Somebody to, who just hasn't been able to take the steps forward, that you really guide them through those first steps. And so I think that it was just perfect.
Thank you. That was what I was striving for, because it's kind of like when I'm playwriting, it's the same thing. When I go to the theater, and I'm a theater artist, as Laurie knows, I want the audience to leave as if you were leaving a restaurant, having had the perfect plate of food. It's not too much where you're overstuffed, and it's not too little where you leave hungry. It's more, in this case, I wanted to keep it short enough because I know that there are other books coming. General universal life skills. I want this to be part of an ongoing series, actually, a toolbox of universal life skills. Like I said, grief is a universal life skill. Every single person on the planet is going to experience it in one measure or another. So I've got this idea for a series of universal life skills books, and this would be the one specifically about grief. So it's almost like an appetizer, right? Or it's the first course, really, I guess, is more accurate. And sometimes with the first course, you get the soup and the salad is the first course. It's like you've got the book and the workbook. They're companions, they complement one another. And it's not too much food to where more is coming, like you said. And you're looking forward to what's coming. So thank you. That's great. Yay, I did it.
I'm so happy to hear that you're thinking about writing about universal life skills, because that is something that is lacking in our society. We're not taught those things. We have to, do our own work and find out. But gosh, if somebody had some guidebooks out there, that would be so great.
Thank you. This has been a long journey, and in terms of life skills education, I was asked years ago when Cameron was a little boy. I was teaching in a high school, a small sort of school of last resorts for kids who were sort of misfits. It was a great school, very artistic, and I was asked to develop a life skills curriculum, and I was like, well, what is that? What does that mean? It's like home ec? I was thinking, right? Sewing and cooking, like how to change the oil in your car, how to open a bank account, that kind of a thing is what I was thinking. But they said, well, whatever you think it is, just build a curriculum around that. Your biography is your best toolkit. to work from. Where do you feel proficient? Where do you feel deficient? Right? Start there. So that's really what opened me up to universal life skills education, because I didn't see it happening in schools. And what I realized on reflecting on my own journey, I didn't get it at home either. Like you were saying, these are things that most of us are not taught, or that we are not taught well enough. You know, when we look at our parents, I think it's easy in hindsight to realize that they were wildly deficient in a lot of the life skills that they're expected to teach children. Your parents are your first teachers, right? And what seems to happen a lot, and this is globally, when parents feel deficient in a particular life skill, when I'm talking life skills, I mean communication skills, emotional literacy, environmental literacy, technological literacy, hygiene, financial literacy, sexual literacy, and the list goes on and on and on. Grief, nutrition, well-being. I'm working on a project right now that'll be part of this series called Agecation. And it's all about the unfolding process of aging and aging well at every stage of life. So this is a big bag of tools, and nobody's proficient in everything. So it does require a degree in our hindsight of what we didn't get, of forgiveness, because the toolkits are inherited, right? We inherit from our parents, they've inherited from their parents, and throughout history, parents have been deficient. And so what do? What do we do? Is we rely on schools to take up the slack and teach the skills that we are deficient in. Well, as we know, most schools are wildly deficient in most of the essential life skills that a human being, a young person, needs to learn to meet the world. And so then what do we turn to? The government? Well, they're not doing a great job either. So where does a young person find their life skills? You said, Laurie, you know, we learn it on our own. Where did you learn your essential life skills throughout your life, both of you, in hindsight?
For me, I always felt like there was, I would say a higher power. I, made a lot of mistakes, which I now know were stepping stones to growth.
Right.
So I don't need to, you don't need to beat yourself up for choices that you think you shouldn't have made. But anyway, I just always had this seeking within, and I just, I think things were put in my path because I was seeking and because I wanted to know, and I wanted to find out who I was and who is more about the higher power and what makes the world tick, what makes each other tick. So I think those questions really drove me, and on the way I was, rewarded with lessons and teachers, and I was grateful for all of them. And I also know that we have a lot of the answers within ourselves. So always getting that message too. Don't forget to go within,
That's
because
right.
you're going to find a lot of wisdom there already. It's already
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And the community that I've I've found. It's just I think that's essential to learning and to growing and to supporting each other.
Mhm.
That means a lot to me. Is the community of like-minded souls and beautiful friends and just and teachers. It's great.
How about you, Laurie?
So for me, I just want to start by, so the conversation of life skills. So I just think that in society, I look at it a little, not that I look at it a little different than you guys, but just that our society has taught us life skills are math and English and this and that. And I I think like what Laurie was just saying, like we're not taught how to really like healthy communication. We're not taught healthy love. We have grown to watch, like you said, people who just don't know, like grief in itself. Like we're not taught how to grieve.
Right.
And I think that those are some of the basic life skills. Like school doesn't teach you any of that. it doesn't teach you healthy boundaries. It doesn't teach you how to stand in your power without the ego. I mean, there's just so many life lessons that make us better society that we're not taught. And I think that in my own experience, that in the beginning of life, we're shown what it's not. And then as we get older and we start this journey of wanting to know who we are, or at least that was mine. So for me, that was my journey, was I wanted to know who I was. I got to a point in my life where I had no idea who I was. I knew who society wanted me to be. I knew who I was supposed to be as a mother, who I was supposed to be as a wife, who I was supposed to be as a daughter, but I didn't know who I was. So I started to learn these life lessons by knowing that all of this was what I didn't want it to be. And how do I discover what I wanted it to be? And I learned through trial and error and through classes and getting to meet beautiful people who I really get to have these conversations with, and I get to learn about myself, and I get to learn those life lessons about how I feel, that I love the new communication that I've learned, that I love these conversations, that these are healthier conversations and healthier ways of being for me.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you ask people, or when I've asked people, whether it's students, clients, whatever, friends, what do you want? What do you want? And that's a hard question for a lot of people to answer because they haven't been given that full toolkit of how to know yourself, right? Even over the Oracle at Delphi, it says, know thyself. I mean, that's pretty basic, but it's something that we are shifted away from, and I think very deliberately. But when you say, what don't you want your life to be? That's the easier list to come up with, and people can come up with it like that. They could list you 10, 20, 30, 40 or more things. And what I encourage my clients to do is to make that list of the things you don't want. It's a very simple exercise. On the left side of the paper, make the list. Everything you can think of that you don't want your life to be, or how you want to be as a person. And then on the right side of the page, across from each one of those things on your list, write the exact opposite. Right? And there's your foundational list of what you want. And nothing's written in blood or stone that it can't be changed or adjusted, right? As you grow and mature and develop. And we're always growing, maturing, and developing, no matter how old we are. So once you've made that list, tear the paper in half and get rid of the negative list. Burn it, eat it, flush it, whatever you need to do, get it off the planet. There you have your foundational list of what you want to be. And human imagination is underappreciated when it comes to manifesting who you want to be. This is really a gift that we have, is to imagine better in the next moment than we experience in this moment, right? So then you take a little metal box, like an Altoids tin or something, and you fold up your little piece of paper of things you want to be and what you want to attract into your life. Put it in that little tin box and then go out into nature and bury it like a seed. Find a stone or a tree or a bush or something where only you know where it is. Make sure you know where it is so you can go back and find it, because every time you achieve one of those things, go back, dig up your little box, cross it off the list, put it back in the box and rebury it like a seed in the earth, right? This is another thing we're taught to do, is to disconnect ourselves from the natural world that we are part of. And I think to interact with the earth as almost a prayer or a wish, right? In fairy tales, you go to the tree and you make the wish. It's that kind of a thing, but you're the one affecting it. It's a very powerful exercise, and invariably, you're going to cross everything off that list. Then guess what? you get to make a new one. And go plant that box, and go plant that seed somewhere else. It's a very simple but very powerful exercise. I actually did this. Laurie and I go way back, and we met when I had the Folklore Theater Company in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And I started a program, a life skills program called the Young Mystics Club. And Laurie was one of our masters. And she taught Reiki. And every child, what were they, 5 to 15, pretty much, every single mystic became a level 1 Reiki master by the end of the program. And we also did nature, botany work. We did theater, we did nutrition, right? I mean, origami, remember? I mean, it was such a beautiful gesture in exactly what we're talking about. It was giving a foundational life skills education to children after school, so you didn't have the pressure of all those expectations. And what we learn is in school is not life skills, it's academic. And academic, if you go and look in the dictionary, it means it has no life, right? It's academic, there's no life in it. And so to bring life skills into an educational environment, whether it's an after-school program like the Young Mystics Club, and we are all mystics from the
That was
moment, right?
that was one of the best experiences I've had. For me to
Me
see
too.
just the children like for learning mindfulness and going outside in nature, taking nature walks, but all the sharing and all the joy that they had also came back to us as this group, and it was so powerful. And just I wish that could be in every place in every town.
I'd love to see. It's another thing on my list of things to do that I want to develop is something that can be applicable in every community because children need it. I remember one time we had, I don't think it was in the Young Mystics, but it was in another program that we were doing, and I had to meet with one of the parents because there were some behavioral issues with their child. And they gave the child their cell phone and said, go sit in the reading room, and while I'm meeting. And so one of our actors in the company was coming down the stairs and looked over the banister and saw this child looking at this phone. And they were watching very graphic videos of car accident victims. I mean, it was horrific, the images that they were searching. And the actress came in, pulled me aside and said, you might want to check what the kid's doing over there because it's pretty, heavy stuff. And the child was only, 4 or 5 years old. And I mentioned it to the mom. Oh, they love medical things. They're all about the, human body, and they're fascinated by medicine and accidents and blood and bones and, all that stuff. But I think that we have crossed a line in terms of overexposing children to worlds that they cannot comprehend. It's like dropping your kids off in, on 42nd Street, Manhattan in the 70s or 80s. I mean, it's full of triple X, dirty drugs, nastiness, and unsupervised, they can go down roads that we cannot even imagine that they would find, but they are finding them. They're being guided there. And so if we delay media influence in the lives of children as long as possible, they'll get it eventually. But let them find it when they're more mature. Let them find it when they're more inclined to, have a better sense of their own foundations and their own life skills toolkit, right? We need to let them be children. We need to let them play. We need to let them go out into nature and get dirty and full of bacteria. I don't want to get preachy, but I think that there are other ways. There are better ways to meet the world. And I also think we need to be using the tools of our time effectively. We can use them for education, right? But we have to be really mindful, as you said, Lori.
Yeah, and I think that we've I mean, there is so many benefits to the technical world and stuff, but at the same time, it's also separating us. We're not using it to, we use it in some ways like this to bring us together when we're not
Yeah.
together, but it's
Yeah.
also separating us from the real world too. And I think as a young child, I mean, what was my first experience is getting to know nature because I was outside playing in the trees and I got to use my own imagination and my own creativity of
Right.
making crown flowers and whatever, going off in some, imagination land that I've gone before. Like you said, there's time to learn to get there, but that let them have that. Let them use their own imagination first. I mean, that child, instead of watching those videos, could be out pretending to be saving bunnies in the forest. I mean, we're not
It's true.
washing it, but we can redefine it.
Well, and we as parents and guardians have to be mindful of what the children are being exposed to. Many of the things, even children's literature, picture books. I used to work in a children's bookstore, and all of those images that they're getting were created by an adult mind and by the hand of an adult artist. It has nothing to do with a child's imagination. It's more programming. This is what a princess looks like. And if a princess doesn't look like the child that's imagining themselves cast in that role, right? It does, if it has no reflection on, say there's a child in a wheelchair, where do they see that in children's literature? Where do they see themselves represented, right? Um, and I think that there are ways to use technology. In fact, the Folklore Theater Company that did the Young Mystics Club is now an audio theater company. And we launched during COVID a children's audio theater series called The Lore. If you go to folklore.world, you can find the stories there. We have 4 that are finished. And these are stories, folk and fairy tales from all over the world that are dying with the people that carry them. These are our primordial, ancestral, ancient tales that come from the tradition of storytelling and literature. And they're being replaced by these hyper intense SpongeBob SquarePants kind of, Powerpuff Girls energy, all very high pitched, high frequency. Where does a child have time for just a gentle, quiet story? And what I love about audio theater, and we're very deliberate about it, we keep them at 30 minutes because I don't want a child sitting there with headphones or in front of a machine for too long. But with audio theater, we provide the story, we provide the scaffolding, but then the child gets to imagine what the monster looks like, what the princess looks like with the prince or the frog or whatever. They are able to create whole worlds in their imagination. The pacing is very deliberate. There's breath in it. There's pause in it. There's beautiful original music underscoring almost entirely through. There's atmosphere. So in the mindset, it's very almost cinematic, but internally, they're beautiful. And there are samples of each story, about 5 minutes of each story you can go and hear. But what I want is that the child will want to go outside and play at these characters that they're learning about, right? Every story, there's such a foundation of mental health in these tales that, again, it came out of a time where children weren't in school for over a year, right? They were feeling anxious, they were feeling nervous, they were feeling depressed. And when I was young, back in the 1960s, I'm dating myself, I had record albums that I would turn to, and I would listen to a story. I remember one was Danny Kaye, the actor Danny Kaye, telling Grimm's fairy tales. And they were layered with atmosphere and sound effects and music. He did all the voices. We have a company, an international company of brilliant voice actors. But it was a way for me to click out of my anxiety and find a calm, friendly voice that I could rely on. It was always that. It was always that sort of bubble away from everything else. Everything else vanished. I was fully immersed in these fantasy worlds that I got to imagine myself in. I painted all the pictures in my imagination. The imagination's a muscle that needs to be worked like any other, right? And so to be the Danny Kaye of the 21st century is a real privilege. And so I do, that's another aspect of my work that, again, is all about life skills. And yeah, it's very special. It's very special to me.
I have to say, sometimes when I read a book and then they bring out a movie, that I'm kind of disappointed in the movie because my imagination was way better than the movie.
Always, always, and I'm really grateful for parents who still read to their children out loud, because there's something about holding up a book, right? And that puts a wall between you and the child. Whereas if you put the book away and you look them in the eye and you tell a story, that's a totally different experience. They're engaged. Better yet, light a beeswax candle before you tell the story. The warm honey glow, the scent of the beeswax, the magic of the fire fairy coming down and lighting the wick, right? You can really create those magical moments for children. The more we can do that for our kids, the better, I think. They're going to be equipped to meet the world on their terms, right? If they see a monster emerge in real life, whether it's war or politics, poverty, if they've had the gift of those magical moments and they realize that it's not only in a dream that you can pull a magic wand out of the sky and turn that monster into a cupcake and eat it, you know, you're much more powerful than you realize. Isn't that the fairy tale? I mean, when you look at the Wizard of Oz and you look at, yeah, that's always the message. You've always had the power within you. Like you said, Lori, you've always had those life skills within you. In fact, when you go back to the original word educato in Latin, which has become education, it means to lead out of or draw out of, like from a well. It doesn't mean to thrust into, right? A lot of information that they're never going to use, and you must learn this, right? And be graded on it, fish, when it's a flying lesson, right? The word for thrusting into is intrudo in Latin. And that to me is what education, mainstream education, has become. It's become very intrusive on all the wisdom that exists in every single human being. You have all the answers in you. And when the student is ready, the master appears. It's all a fairy tale. There's no difference. Dreams are not any less real than our waking state. There's not
It's
one
so,
scientist on the planet who can tell you which is more real than the other. There's reality in both, right? And there's empowerment and wisdom in both.
and it's a part of creating as well. So I get upset when the teacher's like, don't daydream, don't, yes, please daydream, please create, please use your imagination. And I remember those stories too.
Yeah.
I love the radio stories. Yeah. So anyway,
Keep them coming. We've got to keep them coming, right? There are ways, even in the 21st century, to keep the magic alive, to keep that wonder and keep that sense of possibility.
Yeah,
So,
possibility. I mean, I think that we've gotten to a point where we hear this conversation and I just love it. And people are like, well, that's a great dream, but they, how are we going to get there? Well, I think it's like what you said about reading the story in a different way to a child instead of reading the book, creating your own story. I think that the best thing we can start showing our children, which, I hope with my own too, that I do think that they've learned that I have taught them that change is okay. Change is natural. We're not
yeah,
supposed to stay stuck in our beliefs and our thoughts and our ways and anything. And through my discovering myself, it was by changing what I saw to what I wanted to see, what I didn't want to what I wanted. But it wasn't a one-time thing. I changed and then said, oh, this still isn't what I want. This is
yes,
a little bit better, but it's not exactly what I want. And to keep changing. It's we take the leap, and when it's not what we thought it was or what we wanted, we go right back to the old instead of continuing to go down the path till we find exactly what we want. And I think that we
beautiful.
need to teach our children that. I think we need to change the word of failure. There is no failure. Failure doesn't exist. You've learned something. You've learned that, okay, I changed something and it's still not what I want. We change again until we find exactly what we want. And
I'm
I
so
feel
glad
like
I'm not the
that's what
only person on the planet who thinks that failure is not a thing. Thank you for affirming that, because it really, really is. We are here to learn. We are here to grow. We are here to change. And I think that, I had this epiphany recently that, I heard something somewhere in the ether about survival of the fittest, that humans are all about survival, that's what we're seeking, right? That every motivation is based in survival. Well, I disagree with that. I think it's about comfort. We are survival. Every single one of us, if you're breathing air, if you're awake and breathing air, you've survived 100% of everything that life has thrown at you up until this moment, right? I encourage people to go back and find the worst thing that's ever happened to them in life and use that as a measuring stick for everything else coming after that, right? Because then you're able to gauge and compare and say, well, this isn't quite as bad as that was. And I survived that. So the odds are in my favor. I'm going to get through this horrible time too, right? But I started reflecting on our ancestors, and like in the way back where they were still sleeping in bushes and trees. And then somebody had the impulse to go into the cave. And wait a minute, oh, the floor is a little hard and rocky. I can smooth it out, but it's still kind of uncomfortable. I'm going to get some plant matter and some leaves and some feathers and some animal skins. I'm going to make it more comfortable for myself, right? I think that we are a species of comfort seekers. It's like we are trying to replicate on some level the womb environment where we are floating in fluid, we are protected, right? We hear music. We hear our mother humming. We hear the blood rushing through her veins and organs. We hear the resonance of her bone structure. We hear muffled voices of others who are around her, hopefully bringing her comfort, right? And the womb is stretchy. It grows as the baby grows. And if we come back to checking in with ourselves, am I comfortable right now? It's not about, and you hear all these thought leaders and life coaches saying, got to get out of your comfort zone. To me, that's like getting out of your wellness. Got to get really sick so you can get well, right? This is a problem I have with the whole wellness movement. It infers unwellness. Well, we're as well as we can be in the moment that we're in. But if we can find that metaphoric womb that we are trying to replicate, and it's everything from the fabrics that we wear to the sofas that we chill out on, our beds and our bedding and our house, the environments we create for ourselves is really about replicating that, the safety and comfort and fluidity and stretchiness of the womb. So it's not about getting out of your comfort zone. It's about expanding your comfort zone, checking in, where am I right now? Okay, I'm in this point in time and space, surrounded by an infinite peacock tail of possibilities. I'm going to move in that direction. I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to end up at a point B. When you get to point B, when you feel like you've arrived at your point B, first thing, check in with yourself. Am I comfortable? No. Well, guess what? Magically, that point B will turn into a brand new point A, surrounded by infinite possibilities. And all you have to do is choose a different direction, and you'll end up at another point B. That's the journey. But it's the check-in. Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel safe? Do I feel happy? If the answer is no, change the environment. Sometimes it's like that dial. Sometimes it's a subtle movement. Sometimes it's a radical change. If we're really not feeling comfortable, we have to make a bold, radical change, right? And tying back to the book. It's the power that we have as human beings to check in with ourselves. What dimension am I in today, in this moment? And how do I move into a different dimension? How do I know when I've moved into a different dimension? It's all about checking in with yourself. Am I comfortable right now? Am I comfortable right here? And then let your comfort zone expand with you as you grow.
That's well said, Henry Cameron. I love, love, love that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love my dream epiphanies, my paralysis epiphanies. They just, allow me to bring wisdom across into the waking world. And it makes sense to me. It all makes sense to me. And these are things I want to write about. These are things, that are coming in the life skills toolkit, that we really need to start talking and changing the lexicon, changing those words that keep us in a vortex and make it harder to break through. They're very simple. I think people are working too hard at it, frankly. These are simple concepts, not hard to grasp.
We look
Is
forward to
what
more
we do,
books.
right? We make everything really difficult for ourselves. We make it like we have to climb this giant mountain to get there, when it's really in the simple, small steps that get us
We've been
further.
taught to. We've inherited those tapes, right? We've inherited these tapes of repeated messages that we are told, you got to play these, you got to play these, you got to inherit these, you got to accept the inheritance and pass them on to your children. But what nobody tells you is that way back in the closet, under that blanket and that old coat, there's a box of blank tapes that you have access to. All you have to do is pop out that old tape, pop in a blank, and record your own music. It's as simple as that. Those were never yours to inherit, ever.
Well, Henry Cameron, thank you so much. Can you let us know where we can find listeners can find your book? And
Yes.
looking forward to more books. Where can
Great.
they find your book?
If you go to losttraveler.org, I love the name Lost Traveler because it is an ironic name. Nobody's really lost. You are exactly where you are. And yet we've been programmed, we've been taught to feel lost. But like you said, Laurie, all the information is within you. You just have to educate yourself, lead it outwards. And if you can't find somebody to lead it out, when I was early in my grief journey, I was looking for counseling. I was looking for therapy to help me through an experience that I had never imagined. It's every parent's fear, right? And I couldn't find an empathetic counselor because none of them were peregrines. None of them had outlived a child. And therapy without empathy is useless. It was for me. They were all working out of a book that didn't fit my experience. So it took me 15 years, but I went and got my diploma and my international certification as a grief and survival counselor. And it's all online. I can work with anybody, anywhere. I make it affordable and accessible. And I work with individuals, couples, youth, families. And what a gift to take all this wisdom and help move the boulders out of the path with other people who are finding that they feel lost. So yeah, if you go to losttraveler.org, you can find the book. Otherwise, Henry Cameron Allen, all one word.org. That's my main website, and all my other stuff is there. All the many plates I'm spinning.
Great. And we'll put the link below so that you can easily find Henry Cameron Allen and work with his support, get his book and the workbook. I highly recommend it, and help you support through your journey that you're going through. And if you have liked this episode and this conversation as much as I have, please like, share, and subscribe to the page. If you would like to be a future guest on The Next Perfect Step, you can contact us at thenextperfectstep@gmail.com. And until next time, how is your intuition leading you to the next perfect step?
Love it.